You're not stuck in life, you're stuck in your head. The scariest part? You've been living in a prison with the door wide open, and the lock is nothing but your thoughts. Every worry, every replayed conversation, every imagined failure has held you captive, not the world around you. Stoicism teaches that it is not events that disturb us, but the judgments we place upon them. The walls you see, the fears that weigh on you, they were never real. They are words, habits, and stories you've been telling yourself. You carry the weight of yesterday and the uncertainty of tomorrow, leaving little room to breathe, to act, or to notice the life that is happening now. Step back from your thoughts, and you reclaim your attention, the most potent tool you have. Presence is not a gift, it is a practice, a choice. To observe without being controlled, to respond rather than react. Every return to what is real strengthens the mind's alignment with reality, virtue, and purpose. Notice how often your attention drifts to what never existed or what may never arrive. The mind thrives on complexity, on stories, on imagined threats, and in doing so, it steals energy from the only thing that matters, this moment. Anchoring yourself in what is, the breath, the body, the task at hand, is where freedom begins. Clarity emerges quietly, subtly, reshaping your relationship with every thought you experience. The doors were never locked, you only had to see them. You're standing in a room filled with a constant hum, but the hum is not around you, it's inside. It's the ceaseless commentary of your mind, narrating stories you didn't ask it to tell, predicting events that haven't yet arrived, embellishing every detail as though your imagination were the architect of reality itself. Thoughts rise like waves, each one crashing into the next, leaving traces of anxiety, doubt, or regret. You follow them, sometimes willingly, often unconsciously, as if every thought were a command rather than a suggestion. But pause for a moment and notice the machinery itself without trying to silence it. See how it spins, observe the gears turning, the connections forming, without feeling compelled to interfere. Your mind has a rhythm so familiar it masquerades as truth. Yet much of what we suffer is not the world itself, but the judgments we attach to it. Marcus Aurelius reflected, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." The power he speaks of is subtle, not about controlling every thought, but about choosing which ones shape experience and which you simply let pass. It is astonishing how persuasive the mind can be, convincing you that replaying the past or rehearsing the future is necessary, important, even protective. You argue with voices that do not exist, defend against scenarios that will never come, and measure yourself against standards no one set. Each thought promises a form of control, but delivers imprisonment. The habits of thought are so habitual that you rarely notice them, moving through life as though you are following a script someone else wrote. And yet, the very act of noticing, the pause between stimulus and response, is liberation. The space between thought and action is deceptively small, but it is profound. Freedom lies there. Epictetus reminds us, it's not what happens to you, but how you react to it that matters. Observing thought, not as truth but as phenomenon, is the process of making the unconscious conscious. Each unobserved thought, each reaction unexamined, each habitual narrative that goes unchallenged, directs your life silently, invisibly, shaping perception without consent. The body becomes the doorway to presence. Every tension in your shoulders, every shallow breath, every quickened pulse is a signal you cannot ignore. The mind may argue that all is fine, but the body never lies. Focus here, on this moment, on sensation, on the simple act of breathing, feeling the ground beneath your feet. Stoicism emphasizes aligning with reality as it is, not how we imagine it. The mind thrives on distraction, complexity, and drama, but the present is quiet. And in that quiet, the mind cannot weave stories. It can only witness. Witnessing is your first act of freedom. Carl Jung once said, "Your vision will become clear only when you can look into your own heart. Who looks outside dreams. Who looks inside awakes." By returning attention to the body, to sensation, to what is immediate, the machinery of distraction begins to loosen its grip. Action, small and deliberate, becomes the antidote to mental captivity. Thinking alone is not mastery, it is rehearsal. Do the next obvious thing. Send the message, open the book, clean the corner of the room, write one paragraph. Each act grounds attention, strengthens discipline, and reminds the mind that it does not control reality. You do. Stoicism teaches that virtue is revealed in action, that wisdom is shown in what you choose to do rather than what you endlessly contemplate. And in these small victories, you find a rhythm that pulls you from the endless loops of thought into purposeful engagement with the world. Seneca observed, "We suffer more often in imagination than in reality." Each deliberate step affirms presence, proving that the mind is a tool, not a master. Presence in daily life magnifies clarity. Each conversation, each task, each moment of silence becomes an anchor. The world does not demand that you react to every provocation, yet your mind often insists you do. Observe how often imagined offenses or fears hijack your energy. By returning to the facts, what was said, what actually occurred, you begin to cultivate a calm that cannot be manipulated. Stoicism calls this living according to reason, separating impulse from truth, emotion from judgment. And with every return to presence, the stories that once dominated your mind shrink in influence, leaving room for clarity, patience, and real choice. Each deliberate observation of reality strengthens discernment, teaching the mind to respond rather than react. Emotional mastery arises not from suppression, but from engagement. Allow discomfort, grief, or fear to be present without labeling it permanent. Emotion is energy in motion. Thought gives it form and permanence. The Stoics remind us that feelings are neither good nor bad. They are neutral until we interpret them. When you breathe into the raw sensation, you release its hold. Anxiety diminishes not because the situation changes, but because your relationship to it does. You are no longer a prisoner of inner narratives. You are an active participant in your own experience. Carl Jung said, "The most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely." Each wave of emotion, fully observed, becomes a teacher rather than a tyrant, shaping clarity, courage, and presence. The final layer is integration, living with skill rather than reacting from habit. The mind will never be silent, but mastery is returning again and again, anchoring attention to breath, body, and action. Life is unpredictable. Peace does not come from controlling outcomes, but from controlling response. When you practice this daily, the world may remain unchanged, yet you experience freedom, calm, and presence in ways that feel transformative. The Stoics teach that the good life is built on what is within your control, your attention, your reasoned choice, your actions. By cultivating this, you stop living as a captive and start living as a user of your mind, fully awake, fully engaged, fully free. If the pursuit of clarity, presence, and mastery resonates with you, subscribing is not just following a channel, it is a commitment to return again and again to awareness, reason, and the deliberate cultivation of freedom. And there is a quiet satisfaction in this practice that cannot be overstated. It is subtle yet profound, the release of the compulsion to follow every story your mind tells, the easing of tension that comes from unneeded rumination, the emergence of presence where distraction once ruled. The mind, once the tyrant, becomes a tool, a servant to your conscious direction rather than a master of your experience. That retreat is accessible not through escape, but through the disciplined, compassionate observation of your own thoughts, moment by moment, breath by breath, intention by intention. When you practice this, the space between stimulus and reaction expands. It is in that expansion that choice resides. You begin to notice patterns, to see which thoughts enhance life and which deplete it, to observe impulses without allowing them to dictate behavior. The world remains the same, but your experience transforms because the lens through which you view it has been adjusted. Observing thought without obedience is not merely a mental exercise. It is the foundation for mastery over your inner life, the beginning of freedom, the first step in walking unshackled in a world that constantly seeks to distract and destabilize. And so, the very act of noticing, the simple, quiet, deliberate observation of your mind, is a revolution in itself, subtle, continuous, and profoundly transformative, one thought at a time. There is a profound clarity in attending to the body, a clarity that cannot be simulated or theorized. The mind, when untethered, races across past regrets and future anxieties, but sensation grounds you. It reminds you that you exist in a specific place, at a specific moment, that life is happening here and now, and that the mind's stories, while compelling, are separate from the experience itself. Carl Jung observed that your vision will become clear only when you can look into your own heart. Who looks outside, dreams. Who looks inside, awakes. Here, the awakening is tangible, the act of noticing the body, of returning attention to what is immediate and real, is the moment where the separation between self and story begins to dissolve. Sensation is not distraction, it is guidance, a reminder that presence is not a philosophical abstraction, but a lived experience, measurable in the rise and fall of breath, in the warmth of skin, in the subtle cadence of the heartbeat. Every gesture and motion contains within it a lesson, a truth that cannot be argued with or dismissed. The mind often devalues the wisdom of the body, dismissing subtle signals as irrelevant or inconvenient, but they are the compass pointing back to reality. The shallow breath before a stressful meeting, the tension in the jaw when a difficult thought surfaces, the unease in the gut before a conversation, these are all indicators that the mind has wandered from its proper task, observing and responding, not creating unnecessary narratives. To redirect attention to these signals is to train a skill of noticing that has far-reaching consequences. You begin to recognize when thought is productive and when it is mere speculation, when attention is enhancing life and when it is draining it. It is in the alignment of mind and body that the first real agency emerges. There is a rhythm to sensation, a cadence that, once acknowledged, reshapes perception. The world may still contain uncertainty, and circumstances may remain challenging, but when the body is engaged, the mind is less likely to lose itself in speculation or dramatization. Sensation becomes a mirror to reality, the rise and fall of breath, the pressure of the feet, the feeling of air on skin, each registering the immediate, undeniable moment. The Stoics emphasized that we should meet nature as it is, not as we wish it to be. Observing the body works in tandem with this principle. When attention is grounded in the tangible, the narratives of imagined injury or imagined misfortune lose their dominion. The body, honest and immediate, mediates between perception and reality, showing what is true and what is fabrication. When you focus on the body, witnessing becomes effortless. You do not need to interrogate every thought, to analyze every impulse, or to debate every fear. Attention naturally gravitates toward what is present, what is undeniable, what is immediate. Each breath is a signal, each heartbeat a reminder that life is happening here. The mind, which thrives on complexity and distraction, cannot manufacture its stories in this space. It can observe, but it cannot fabricate. In this quiet, there is clarity. The body's signals are simple, but they are profoundly instructive. They teach you that freedom is not obtained by silencing thought entirely, but by cultivating the capacity to witness, to notice without reacting, to align attention with reality rather than imagination. Even the smallest, most subtle bodily sensations can become exercises in awareness. The way your hands rest on your desk, the pressure of the chair beneath you, the tension in your shoulders, all of it is available for observation. Each return of attention to these points, each deliberate noticing of sensation, strengthens presence, sharpens awareness, and deepens the practice of self-governance. Reacting in this context does not mean responding to every thought. It means cultivating the habit of returning to what is real, using the body as a conduit to practice restraint, patience, and clarity. Over time, the mind learns that its wandering does not define you, and the stories it creates lose their binding power. The body, when observed, also anchors resilience. In moments of stress, when the mind begins its usual rehearsals of fear and failure, sensation can serve as a tether. Returning to the rise and fall of breath, the feel of feet against the ground, the natural rhythm of movement, provides stability when mental chaos threatens to destabilize. Seneca noted, "He is a wise man who does not grieve for the things which he has not, but rejoices for those which he has." The simple act of noticing what is already present in the body embodies this wisdom. Rather than chasing imagined deficits, you recognize reality and engage with it directly. The attention devoted to sensation, simple and disciplined, becomes a form of mastery, a way to reclaim the mind from its habitual distractions. Presence is not a passive state. It is an active discipline. Each return to bodily awareness requires effort, but the effort is subtle, almost imperceptible. It is not coercion but choice, repeated over and over until the alignment between mind and body becomes natural. Each moment spent returning attention to the body reinforces a habit of presence. Each observation strengthens the mind's capacity to witness rather than react, to participate rather than be swept along by narrative currents. This habitual anchoring of attention to sensation cultivates freedom, the freedom to engage with life as it is, not as imagined, and to act with clarity, courage, and intentionality. The body is, in essence, the first classroom for the mind. The wisdom it offers is immediate, unmistakable, and available at every moment. Every inhalation, every exhalation, every subtle pulse is a lesson in what is real, a reminder of where attention belongs, and a conduit to presence. By cultivating the ability to notice the body without distraction or judgment, you begin to reclaim your attention, your freedom, and your life. Witnessing sensation becomes a practice of liberation, an exercise in aligning thought with reality, and a doorway to clarity that nothing else can provide. It is here, in the simple act of observing what is, that true presence and true freedom emerges quietly but irrevocably, one sensation at a time. Recognition of mental patterns allows for another layer of insight. The habitual loops are not just abstract or emotional, they are predictive. They form a script that the mind expects to follow, a rhythm that the body often unconsciously supports. Tension accumulates before a conversation because the mind anticipates conflict. Self-doubt arises before a presentation because the mind has rehearsed inadequacy countless times. Catastrophic imaginings surge when the mind is idle, spinning scenarios with a precision that feels deliberate but is merely repetitive. Awareness of these loops is akin to finding a fault line before an earthquake. Once you see it, you can anticipate the shift and prepare, and sometimes you can divert its course entirely. The recognition that much of the tension we feel is generated internally is liberating. Patterns that once seemed inevitable can now be interrupted, redirected, or softened through mindful engagement. The challenge is not to eradicate thoughts, the mind will never cease producing them, but to engage with them differently. Each pattern is a thread, and you are no longer obliged to weave it into the fabric of your identity. You can acknowledge a thought without obeying it, consider a worry without letting it dictate action, reflect on a perceived slight without internalizing it as truth. This approach does not silence the mind, but it shifts the relationship from compulsive engagement to deliberate observation. The insight here is that the power is not in controlling circumstances or erasing patterns, but in exercising the choice to step out of the habitual story, to regard it as a phenomenon rather than a command. That step is the first act of freedom. Patterns are often reinforced by memory, the mind's archive of experiences it uses to validate expectation. A minor criticism is recalled as proof of inadequacy, a failed attempt as evidence of permanent limitation. Relationships, ambitions, and self-perception are filtered through this archive, and the mind then predicts future suffering based on a past selectively curated. This loop of anticipation and interpretation strengthens itself with repetition. The clarity that comes from observing patterns begins to break these loops. By seeing the predictive mechanism for what it is, a machine replaying old scripts, you begin to recognize when your mind is exaggerating or misrepresenting reality. By noticing the patterns without merging with them, you create an internal space where choice exists, where you are not compelled to follow habitual narratives blindly. The mind is naturally inclined to dramatize because drama captures attention, but this dramatization is often at odds with reality. The mind will magnify perceived threats, replay imagined offenses, and construct elaborate mental stories that feed anxiety. Awareness of patterns allows you to see these constructions for what they are: temporary, conditional, and ultimately optional. Presence becomes the tool to anchor attention in the midst of this noise. By returning attention repeatedly to the immediate, to what can be sensed and verified, the habitual loops lose their dominance. Each observation is a subtle act of training, a deliberate reallocation of attention away from narrative and toward reality. In doing so, the mind gradually recalibrates, learning that its stories are not mandates, but phenomena to witness, consider, and, when necessary, release. Breaking the habitual pull of thought does not mean denying its existence. It means cultivating a relationship with the mind where presence and attention, not impulse and reaction, govern experience. The patterns themselves are neither good nor bad. They are neutral until you respond. You begin to see that the story the mind tells is often a habit designed to maintain tension and control, not to enhance life. By stepping outside habitual judgment, by observing patterns without attachment, the grip of fear and limitation begins to loosen. Freedom emerges not from eliminating the narrative entirely, but from knowing when to step aside, when to witness, and when to let it pass. In doing so, you create the possibility of life lived with clarity, presence, and intentionality, liberated from the tyranny of compulsive thought loops. The small acts of engagement carry weight far beyond their apparent significance. They interrupt the default state of mental captivity. When you act, you remind yourself that the mind is not the master of reality. It is a tool. The body and will, the deliberate choices you make, are the instruments of change. Even the simplest actions generate a feedback loop. Effort produces clarity, clarity produces confidence, and confidence strengthens the capacity to act further. Every completed task, however minor, asserts agency and quiets the inner commentary that so often dominates your attention. The Stoics emphasized that wisdom is realized not in idle contemplation, but in disciplined action. The essence of virtue, in his perspective, is not theoretical, it is practical. Each conscious act aligns thought with reality, reinforcing patterns of agency rather than passivity. Repetition is central to mastery. The mind, left to its devices, prefers the familiar, even when familiar means anxious, distracted, or fearful. By inserting action into the flow of habit, you rewire the mental pattern. Each deliberate act, though small, is a signal to the mind that you are not bound to the habitual loop of worry or indecision. Epictetus reminded us, well-being is attained little by little, and nevertheless is no little thing. The implication is clear. Incremental acts of presence, attention, and engagement compound over time, producing profound transformation. The next obvious step, often overlooked because it seems trivial, is a decisive intervention against the tyranny of thought. It is not the scale of the action, but the decision to act at all, that sets the mind free. The mind naturally resists action because it prefers comfort and inertia. It will argue that conditions are insufficient, that preparation is incomplete, that the right time has not arrived. These rationalizations are the mind's strategy to maintain control, to continue the rehearsal rather than engage in the reality that might demand courage, adaptability, or discomfort. Action is inherently challenging because it introduces uncertainty, yet it is precisely this engagement with uncertainty that produces growth. Seneca observed, "Luck is what happens when preparation meets opportunity." In the framework of mental mastery, preparation is irrelevant unless it is paired with action. Each small step transforms potential into reality, intention into accomplishment, and thinking into living. By repeatedly acting in this deliberate, measured way, you cultivate resilience, discipline, and trust in your own capacity to navigate the world. The rhythm of repeated action begins to recalibrate perception. Thought no longer dominates the landscape of experience because each completed step confirms that agency exists outside of narrative. The mind notices that reality responds to action, and gradually the compulsion to endlessly replay scenarios diminishes. Anxiety is reduced not through logic alone, but through engagement. The act of sending the message alleviates the fear of inaction, opening space for clarity and focus. Each repeated act becomes a building block, a rhythm that transforms hesitation into momentum, passivity into intentional movement. There is a subtle interplay between attention and action. Mental captivity thrives when attention is scattered, when thought dominates and the mind fixates on all that could go wrong or all that is imagined. Action, by contrast, anchors attention. Even a single deliberate act, the brush of your hand across a surface, the mark of a pen on paper, the tap of a key, grounds awareness in the tangible. It draws the mind from abstraction into reality. In practice, this means engaging fully with the immediate task, allowing attention and effort to converge, dissolving the power of mental distraction. The repeated act of returning to what is immediate, real, and actionable is a profound exercise in freedom. Each small action serves as evidence against the tyranny of idle thought. The mind, previously accustomed to rehearsing endlessly, begins to learn a different rhythm. Tasks that once seemed monumental are now approached in increments, breaking the illusion of overwhelming complexity. This approach reinforces the understanding that mastery is built not in the mind alone, but in the relationship between mind and action. Sensation, decision, and execution form a cycle where thought informs action, action clarifies thought, and presence strengthens both. The Stoics maintained that virtue is not passive, it is exercised. Each step you take in alignment with intention confirms agency, strengthens attention, and teaches the mind that it is not the sole arbiter of reality. The cumulative effect of small, deliberate action extends beyond individual tasks. Life itself begins to feel less fragmented and more coherent. Anxiety, previously fueled by imagined scenarios and internal narratives, diminishes because the habit of acting interrupts habitual loops. Presence expands as attention is anchored in repeated engagement with reality. Epictetus summarized this principle, saying, "Don't explain your philosophy, embody it. To act is to embody awareness, intention, and mastery. Each act, however minor, confirms your capacity to participate fully in life, to reclaim freedom from the internal compulsions that have dominated thought for so long." Action, in this way, becomes not just a remedy for mental captivity, but a practice in the cultivation of character, discipline, and self-governance. Over time, these small victories accumulate into a transformative rhythm. Mental captivity loosens its grip as the mind learns that its compulsions are optional, that its stories do not dictate reality, and that deliberate engagement produces clarity and power. The repeated act of doing the next obvious thing trains attention, fortifies will, and builds trust in one's own capacity to navigate life. The process is neither dramatic nor sudden. It is subtle, continuous, and profound. By embedding action into the daily rhythm, by committing to presence through deliberate engagement, you create a foundation for freedom that is practical, tangible, and resilient. In each repeated act, you discover the space between thought and result, and it is in this space that mastery and agency emerge, quietly but irrevocably, one deliberate step at a time. The mind is naturally inclined to overreact. Subtle gestures, a tone of voice, a pause. These can be misinterpreted, inflated into imagined offenses or judgments that consume energy and disrupt focus. Yet reality is often simpler than the story the mind tells. By returning attention to observable facts, the actual words spoken, the tangible outcomes, the immediate circumstances, you begin to see the difference between narrative and truth. This is not detachment from life. It is a closer engagement with it. Recognizing this, you no longer feel compelled to react to every provocation. You learn that energy wasted on imagined conflicts, judgments, and fears is energy diverted from meaningful action, from presence, from growth. Each return to the observable anchors attention, teaching the mind that reality is not what it imagines, but what it observes and experiences directly. Presence is cultivated in repetition. Every act of noticing, every return to what is, strengthens the capacity to disengage from habitual reactivity. In conversation, notice the pause between stimulus and response, the space where choice exists. In work, notice the task itself, its requirements and possibilities, rather than overlaying it with anxiety, comparison, or expectation. In silence, notice the breath, the sensations of the body, the environment around you. This repeated anchoring is a form of mental training, building resilience against distraction and narrative. Epictetus reflected on this skill when he said, "No man is free who is not master of himself." Freedom, in this sense, emerges from deliberate engagement, from repeated practice in separating judgment from fact, impulse from action, thought from reality. Each act of presence is a subtle exercise in mastery, a practice that over time reshapes the landscape of attention and perception. Emotion, when unexamined, magnifies mental distortions. Fear, frustration, and irritation grow exponentially when they are engaged through habitual stories rather than observed as immediate experience. Observing reality as it is, what was actually said, what actually occurred, reduces the amplification of these emotional reactions. Each return to presence acts as a corrective, a calibration that reminds the mind that it does not need to follow every narrative thread. By cultivating awareness in daily life, by consciously attending to facts rather than assumptions, unconscious emotional patterns are brought into light. The pull of imagined offenses, the habitual overvaluation of small events, and the anticipatory anxiety about what might happen all diminish as clarity grows. Presence becomes a shield against manipulation by thought, story, or impulse, not by resisting, but by seeing clearly. Even ordinary daily activities can serve as anchors when approached with intention. Preparing a meal, walking down a familiar street, engaging in conversation with a colleague, these moments, when attended to fully, offer repeated opportunities to practice clarity. Attention to reality reinforces the mind's capacity to discriminate between the essential and the imagined. When the mind is fully anchored in the immediate, this suffering diminishes. Each moment of clarity allows for measured response, thoughtful interaction, and deliberate choice, rather than reactive drift. The mind begins to internalize a new rhythm, one in which observation precedes reaction, understanding precedes judgment, and reality itself becomes the teacher rather than the narratives we fabricate. Patterns of mental hijacking are subtle but pervasive. Often, the mind misreads cues, inflates possibilities, or anticipates offense before it occurs. The energy consumed in these anticipations is immense. By repeatedly returning to presence, the mind learns a different rhythm, one of observation before reaction, one of discernment rather than impulse. Applying this principle, each encounter with daily life becomes an opportunity to reduce the influence of habitual mental stories. The small, repeated practice of attending to observable facts builds a foundation for calm, patience, and intentional action. Over time, this practice erodes the power of the habitual narrative, leaving room for freedom, clarity, and authentic choice. The mind is often seduced by the need to react, to assert control, to interpret, to predict. Yet this reaction is rarely necessary, rarely constructive. By choosing presence as the default posture, you reclaim energy and clarity. Each moment in which attention is returned to what is observable reinforces the capacity to act deliberately rather than react automatically. Observing daily life with clarity allows you to entertain the mind's stories without absorbing them, to notice the surge of emotion without being consumed by it, to witness the narrative without participating in its distortions. Presence, repeated consistently, becomes the muscle through which freedom, discernment, and calm are exercised. The cumulative effect of anchoring attention in daily reality transforms the mind and life. Stories that once dominated consciousness lose influence. Anxiety about imagined slights, imagined failures, or exaggerated possibilities diminishes because the habitual pattern of over-interpretation has been interrupted. Presence does not remove challenges. It removes the unnecessary suffering imposed by unexamined thought. Each return to the facts, each deliberate engagement with what actually occurs, builds a new relationship with the mind, one in which clarity, patience, and agency replace compulsion, fear, and distraction. Life becomes accessible in a new way, not through control of the world, but through disciplined observation and engagement with what is real. Through practice, presence becomes second nature. Each conversation, task, and silent interval is an opportunity to anchor attention, refine judgment, and choose deliberate action. The stories the mind once insisted upon gradually recede, replaced by awareness and clarity. Choice is restored where compulsion once ruled. Reality becomes visible not through interpretation, but through attentive engagement. By cultivating presence in daily life, clarity becomes the baseline, thought becomes a tool rather than a tyrant, and each moment offers the possibility of intentional action rather than reaction. In this clarity, the mind's habitual stories shrink, energy is conserved, and a foundation for freedom and wise action emerges. Emotion is not a force to be avoided. It is a signal, a current flowing through the mind and body that carries information about life as it is being experienced. Every pang of discomfort, every flicker of grief, every surge of fear is telling you something. The mind often interprets these signals as permanent, as evidence of inadequacy, weakness, or doom. But the reality is that emotions, in their raw state, are fluid, temporary, and informative. To suppress them is to deny the intelligence of your own system, to ignore the lessons embedded in sensation. Instead, engagement is required. Not indulgence, not avoidance, but conscious attention to the flow of experience as it presents itself. The Stoics emphasize that events themselves are neutral. It is our interpretation that assigns value and meaning. By observing emotion without conferring permanence upon it, by attending to it as it rises and falls, you cultivate mastery over your inner world. Awareness and attention are the instruments through which the power to shape experience is exercised. Every moment of emotional turbulence contains the opportunity for insight. Anxiety, grief, anger, and fear are not enemies. They are messengers. They reveal where attention has been scattered, where expectations have been imposed upon reality, and where habitual narratives dominate perception. Carl Jung observed, The most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely. Accepting the totality of emotional experience without judgment or labeling is not resignation. It is the acknowledgement that presence requires full engagement with reality. When discomfort is welcomed and observed, it loses its capacity to dominate. Fear becomes a teacher rather than a jailer. Grief becomes a guide rather than a chain. And tension in the body becomes a signal rather than a verdict. The act of observing, of breathing into the raw sensation, transforms emotion from a reactive force into an informative one. The energy is no longer trapped in narrative loops. It moves, disperses, and integrates into conscious understanding. The mind tends to conflate thought and feeling, as if one validates the other. A fleeting discomfort becomes a story of inadequacy. A brief frustration transforms into a narrative of failure. Anxiety appears to justify itself by creating imagined consequences. By attending to emotion directly, by observing its raw, unembellished form, the mind is trained to separate energy from story. The act of breathing into the sensation, of acknowledging it without judgment, dismantles the artificial permanence the mind ascribes to it. Presence becomes the stabilizing force, the conduit through which emotion is allowed to move without imposing narrative or consequence beyond the immediate. The physiological dimension of emotion is as informative as the mental. Tension in the chest, rapid breath, shallow movements, these are the body's indicators that the mind has been hijacked by narrative. Attending to the body in conjunction with emotion strengthens presence. Each inhalation and exhalation, each subtle scan of sensation, is an anchor. When the body and the mind are aligned in observation, energy that was previously trapped in loops of worry or fear begins to flow. Action emerges organically from this clarity, a pause before reaction, a measured response rather than impulsive reaction. Aristotle once said, "Knowing yourself is the beginning of all wisdom." Emotional awareness is self-knowledge in action. It is the cultivation of wisdom through direct engagement with internal experience. Each moment spent noticing, observing, and allowing sensation is a step toward mastery, a reclamation of agency from the narratives that previously dominated thought. The nature of emotion is temporal. Every surge, every crest of fear, every tremor of sadness has a peak and a decline. When attention is applied consciously, the rise and fall of these states can be observed as phenomena rather than commands. The mind learns that presence is possible even in discomfort, that clarity is possible even amidst emotional turbulence. Jung's insight resonates here. There is no coming to consciousness without pain. Emotional mastery is not about avoiding pain, but observing it, integrating it, and learning from it. Each wave of feeling, once observed, becomes data, a teacher showing where attachment, aversion, or misconception has been embedded in habitual thought. Over time, the habitual overreaction diminishes, replaced by measured response, patience, and alignment with reality. Anxiety often feels like a permanent condition, a shadow that follows each step, yet it is fundamentally energy in motion. It is given weight and permanence only through narrative and judgment. By practicing engagement rather than suppression, by breathing into the raw sensation and observing it fully, you reclaim energy and autonomy. Stoicism teaches that freedom is the capacity to choose attention, to decide what will shape perception and action. Emotional mastery is precisely this, claiming the space between sensation and reaction, observing the currents of feeling, and choosing presence over compulsion. The culmination of this practice is profound. By engaging with emotion directly, without labeling, without resisting, without letting narrative dictate permanence, you transform the internal environment. The stories the mind has long rehearsed lose authority. Anxiety diminishes because it is no longer reinforced by misinterpretation. Fear softens because it is observed rather than fed. Grief passes through instead of freezing into identity. Each engagement builds skill, the skill to witness, the skill to regulate, the skill to participate consciously in life. Emotional mastery is courage applied inwardly, the courage to face the flow of feeling without surrendering to it, the courage to step into experience fully while remaining in control of attention and action. Freedom is not found in suppression. It is cultivated through presence, observation, and engagement. Each moment of emotional attention strengthens the capacity to respond rather than react, to act from reason rather than from compulsion. The mind is trained to see energy for what it is, temporary, informative, and malleable, rather than a permanent verdict on self or world. Over time, the repeated practice of noticing, breathing, and allowing transforms experience, dissolving the tyranny of inner narrative and establishing agency over the self. You are no longer a prisoner of inner turbulence. You are a participant in life, fully awake, fully present, and capable of choosing how energy, attention, and response are directed. Skill is the quiet force that reshapes experience from chaos into order, from reaction into intentionality. The mind will never be silent. Thoughts rise unbidden, some fleeting, some persistent, each demanding attention in their own subtle way. Yet mastery does not require muting the mind. It requires returning again and again to the anchors that preserve clarity and agency. Breath, body, action, these become the tools of practice, the levers through which attention is directed and life is engaged. The repetition of this act is not mechanical, it is deliberate, a cultivation of presence that accumulates silently yet profoundly. Over time, the mind learns that its compulsions do not dictate reality, that its stories are suggestions rather than mandates, and that freedom resides not in controlling events, but in governing the response to them. This daily discipline, repeated consistently, forms a rhythm in which attention is trained, impulse is tempered, and clarity becomes a natural state rather than an intermittent achievement. Life is inherently unpredictable. Circumstances shift without warning, relationships change, fortunes rise and fall, and the body and mind confront new challenges daily. Peace cannot be found in controlling outcomes. It is forged through the consistent exercise of response, through the conscious choice to engage with what is, rather than resist, speculate, or lament. Every moment of observation, every measured action, every return to sensation or breath strengthens the mind's capacity to meet reality as it is. Epictetus observed, "No great thing is created suddenly, any more than a bunch of grapes or a fig. If you tell me that you desire a fig, I answer you that there must be time. Let it first blossom, then bear fruit, then ripen." Mastery is cultivated in the same incremental, patient manner. Each return to presence, each small act of alignment, each conscious observation compounds into skill, reinforcing calm and resilience even when external circumstances remain unchanged. The mind, left unanchored, defaults to habit. It leaps at every perceived insult, magnifies minor discomforts, rehearses imagined futures, and amplifies old regrets. This is the nature of thought, constant, untamed, relentless. Yet repeated attention to breath, body, and action interrupts this habitual loop. Each moment spent returning attention is a deliberate act of reclaiming autonomy. Over time, these returns establish a pattern that strengthens the ability to respond rather than react, to engage with life rather than be swept along by mental narratives. The recognition that inner governance is the locus of freedom transforms each interaction, each decision, each encounter from a potential source of distraction or anxiety into an opportunity to practice presence, clarity, and discernment. Integration is not a single achievement, nor a sudden revelation. It is cumulative, built in moments both subtle and ordinary. The feeling of grounded attention during a conversation, the clarity of focus while completing a task, the calm that arises in the midst of minor discomfort, All of these are instances of practice woven into the fabric of life. Emotional turbulence, habitual distraction, and the mind's compulsion to narrate persist, but their authority diminishes as attention is repeatedly anchored in the present. By returning again and again to deliberate engagement, attention becomes skill, and skill becomes a form of freedom. The capacity to act, to respond, and to participate consciously in life is strengthened in each moment, shaping character as much as circumstance. The practice of anchoring attention is inherently adaptive. Life does not wait for preparedness. It unfolds continuously, often unpredictably. By cultivating the skill to return to breath, body, and action, you establish a flexible resilience that does not depend on external stability. Anxiety no longer dominates because it is observed rather than absorbed. Distraction no longer dictates because presence is actively reclaimed. Emotional reactivity is moderated because sensation and awareness are consciously attended. Seneca reflected, "We are always complaining that our days are few and acting as though there would be no end of them." By attending to the present moment, by practicing attention as a skill rather than reacting from habit, each day is inhabited fully, each action chosen deliberately, and each interaction approached with clarity. Presence becomes habitual, calm becomes accessible, and freedom emerges as an internal condition rather than a product of circumstance. Every action, however small, reinforces integration. Washing hands, preparing a meal, speaking in conversation, writing a paragraph. These seemingly mundane acts are the repeated practice of mastery when approached with deliberate attention. The mind notices, internalizes, and gradually adapts. Momentum builds, clarity becomes easier to sustain, impulsive reactions diminish, and the ability to engage thoughtfully in each moment strengthens. Each moment of anchored attention contributes to this well-being. Integration is not a philosophical abstraction, it is the lived, iterative alignment of thought, attention, action, and sensation. It is the embodiment of mastery in everyday life. The mind's narratives are not erased by practice, nor are emotional currents nullified. They are redirected through awareness and skill. Presence allows observation without attachment, engagement without compulsion. Fear may arise, doubt may surface, and distraction will inevitably attempt to regain control. But the skill cultivated through consistent practice enables choice. You are no longer driven by every impulse or compelled by habitual story. The repetition of returning attention, observing the body and breath, and engaging deliberately in action establishes a new default: skill, presence, and clarity rather than reaction, distraction, and compulsion. Ultimately, integration transforms experience. The world remains unpredictable, challenges continue, and the mind continues to generate stories, yet your engagement with life shifts fundamentally. You are no longer a captive of internal narrative or external circumstance. Each day, each action, each breath is an opportunity to exercise mastery, to direct attention deliberately, and to participate consciously in reality. Here, happiness is synonymous with freedom, the freedom to engage with life fully, to act with awareness, and to navigate thought and emotion skillfully. Integration is the culmination of practice, repeated, deliberate, and patient, creating the conditions in which clarity, calm, and agency become natural expressions of being. By living as a user of your mind rather than a captive, you achieve what the Stoics considered the good life. Attention, reasoned choice, and deliberate action form the foundation of freedom. Breath, body, and engagement are the tools by which the mind is trained and cultivated. Each repetition strengthens these faculties, gradually creating a rhythm in which life is experienced directly, not filtered through habitual narrative or reaction. Emotional turbulence, mental loops, and distraction no longer dominate. They are observed, navigated, and allowed to pass without interference. This practice, repeated daily, produces a profound shift. From internal chaos to mastery, from reaction to deliberate participation, from captivity to freedom. Remember this, the mind will never be silent, but your power lies in returning, moment by moment, to your breath, your body, and your actions. Freedom isn't about controlling the world, it's about mastering yourself. Each step you take in presence, each choice you make with awareness, transforms the way you move through life. You are no longer a captive of thought. You are an active participant, fully awake, fully engaged, fully free. Thank you for being a part of Stoic Journal and for committing to the practice of presence with us. If you want to continue this journey, click on one of the suggested videos on the screen to explore more ways to cultivate clarity, calm, and mastery in your daily life.